The Box, Frame of Reference, a Consciousness Manifesto, Volume 3. We don't see the box we live in, we see through it. Its edges are made of comparisons and expectations. What should be, what used to be, what someone else paraded before us. This story isn't about smashing some metaphorical cube. It's about recognizing the frame you've been using to judge your life and what happens when it finally begins to crack. Before transformation comes confinement. This is The Box, the third awakening on the Consciousness Manifesto journey. Unlike the previous volumes, this story didn't arrive as a distant parable or a client's case study. It unfolded right in front of me. I wasn't just observing from the sidelines. I became part of it. A witness, yes, but also a character. What follows isn't a formula or a lecture. It's a story, raw, reflective, and uncomfortably true. Ready to begin? The cafe. One Sunday morning, around 9 a.m., I found myself at a nearly empty sports cafe. Screens flickering with pre-race footage. The air smelled of fresh coffee and anticipation. I'd come to meet my friend Brian to watch the Formula One race, our small tradition to catch up despite busy lives. The place was quiet, maybe 6 patrons at most. I secured a table, eager for a relaxed morning with an old friend. Brian arrived a few minutes later, but before joining me, he stopped to greet another man sitting alone. To my surprise, he beckoned his acquaintance over to our table. "Daniel, this is my good friend Mahmud," Brian introduced as the man approached. I forced a polite smile, hiding a flicker of disappointment. I had hoped for one-on-one time with Brian. Still, I shook Mahmud's hand and welcomed him to join us. No sooner had we settled than Brian mentioned my profession. "Daniel is a life coach," he told Mahmud cheerfully. At that, Mahmud's eyes lit up with keen interest. "Really? A coach for life?" he asked, sounding both curious and intrigued. I nodded and gave a brief explanation of what I do, expecting to then steer the conversation back to light topics or the upcoming race. But Mahmud had already drifted somewhere else. He leaned back, gaze turning distant. "I wish I'd known about your services before everything went bad for me," he said softly. His tone carried a heavy sorrow that instantly changed the mood at our table. The morning light through the cafe window fell across his face, revealing tired eyes and a tightened jaw. Clearly, this man was carrying a burden. Sensing the shift, I attempted to deflect with a comment about the race starting in a few minutes, but Mahmud gently persisted. "You'll want to hear my story, trust me," he insisted. Brian gave me a small nod, as if to say that listening might do more good now than watching the race. I hesitated, unsure if this was the right time or place for such a conversation. The cars on screen were lining up at the starting grid, but at our table, a different kind of start was unfolding. I exhaled and offered a faint smile. "All right," I said. "I'm listening." Mahmud took a slow breath, collecting his thoughts. When he began speaking, his voice was low and measured, tinged with regret. In my mind, the hum of the cafe and the commentary from the TVs faded into the background as his story drew me in. He brought me back to the moment it all began, 5 years ago. At that time, Mahmud was in his late 40s, living what looked like a comfortable life. He had been married for 22 years to his wife, Amira, and they had 3 children together, 2 daughters and a son. Their eldest, Sarah, was 19 and away at university, studying law. Mahmud owned a successful manufacturing business. The family lived in a large home with a 3-car garage and enjoyed the trappings of upper-middle-class success. By all accounts, he had achieved the immigrant dream after moving from Lebanon. His days followed a familiar rhythm of work, family dinners, and quiet evenings. Life was steady, even if a bit routine. For instance, on many evenings after dinner, Mahmud and Amira would linger at the table long after their children had left, chatting about their day or planning the weekend. Amira might tease him about his work habits. "Don't work so hard, Habibi. I need you in one piece," she would say with a playful smile. He'd laugh and squeeze her hand, replying, "With you looking after me, I'm invincible." Small moments like that defined their life together. Each morning she brought him a cup of coffee with a kiss on his cheek. They would banter about which of the kids might sleep through their alarm this time. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was warm, supportive, and rooted in deep mutual respect. Beneath the surface of that normalcy, however, something was beginning to stir. It started the day. One of Mahmud's closest friends dropped some unexpected news. This friend, someone Mahmud had known since their school days back in Lebanon, had astonished him by divorcing his wife of many years and, just a few months later, marrying a woman nearly half their age. The two men were the same age, both nearing 50, so the development came as a shock. At first, Mahmud felt surprise and curiosity more than anything else. He was happy for his friend's apparent newfound joy, if a little perplexed by how quickly it had all happened. They met for lunch often, and each time, the friend would gush about his young bride. He bragged that she made him feel alive again, that being with her was like rediscovering youth. "She keeps me young," the friend would say, practically glowing as he spoke. He'd show off photos of the two of them, her radiant smile, his revitalized grin, and recount how his energy and zest for life had skyrocketed. Mahmud listened politely, nodding and offering congratulations. On the surface, he truly seemed pleased that his buddy was happy. Yet every time they parted, Mahmud felt a strange hollowness linger. He didn't recognize it immediately, but those lunches planted a seed of discontent in him. He would return home to Amira and, without meaning to, look at her through a different lens. What he once saw as a normal, loving marriage now felt dull by comparison. The quiet familiarity of life with Amira, which had always been enough, began to feel unfulfilling when contrasted with the vibrant picture his friend painted. Mahmud didn't yet understand why he felt that way. After all, nothing in his own life had changed, but his friend's words echoed, "She keeps me young." And with them came a quiet question he couldn't shake. What am I missing? He didn't realize it then, but his friend's radical life change had affected him far more than he knew. The seed. In the weeks and months that followed, that seed of discontent quietly grew roots inside Mahmud. He couldn't shake the subtle sense that something was missing. What began as a faint whisper of curiosity turned into a constant, nagging presence at the back of his mind. At first, he tried to dismiss it. He told himself he was being silly, that he had a good life and should be grateful. And yet, day by day, a restlessness crept in. He began to find small faults in his everyday life. Minor things that had never bothered him before suddenly did. The morning coffee Amira brought him felt lukewarm. The house that used to be their pride now seemed perpetually a little untidy. Every evening fell into the same routine dinner with the family, a bit of television, then bed. What once was a comforting pattern began to feel like tedious repetition. A part of him started to wonder, is this all there is? One night, when Amira reached for him in bed, Mahmud felt a wave of disinterest. He didn't pull away. He went through the motions, but the spark wasn't there. The same touches, the same rhythm, the same routine they had repeated for years. Nothing was wrong with her, but that was part of the problem. Everything was exactly the same. As she drifted off beside him, satisfied, Mahmud lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He felt restless, unsatisfied, and quietly ashamed. It wasn't that anything had changed about her. Something had shifted in him. He realized he was growing tired of what he bitterly dubbed the same old thing. In quiet moments, he kept hearing his friend's exuberant voice echo in his head. "She keeps me young." The words looped in his thoughts, like a catchy tune he couldn't get out of his mind. He would watch Amira fold laundry or chat about the children's day, and before he even realized it, comparisons would flare in his mind. Instead of seeing the woman who had been his partner for over 2 decades, he saw only what she wasn't. She wasn't as energetic and spontaneous as the young wife his friend had. She wasn't waiting at the door in a sleek dress to whisk him off on adventures. By evening, she was usually in comfortable pajamas after a long day of household chores. Mahmud found himself mentally tallying Amira's perceived shortcomings. The house wasn't as spotless as he liked. His own mother, raising 7 children back in Lebanon, had somehow managed to keep an immaculate home. Dinner was tasty, but unremarkable. His mother had cooked elaborate feasts every evening, even with so many mouths to feed. If Amira forgot to iron one of his shirts, he'd fume internally that his mother would never have let his clothes go wrinkled. These thoughts were unfair, and he knew it on some level. Yet once they began, he couldn't stop picking his wife apart in his mind. He had always revered his mother as the gold standard of womanhood, cooking lavish meals, keeping the house pristine, treating his father like a king. In his eyes, that was what every wife should aspire to. By comparison, Amira had grown up in a different era. She was well educated and had willingly set aside her career to raise their children. She was a loving, patient, and wise partner. But now Mahmud was unfairly measuring her against an idealized memory of his mother and the fantasy of a 20-something woman he had never even met. It was a contest she could never win. This quiet dissatisfaction churned inside him. At work, in traffic, during family gatherings, he would catch himself fantasizing about what a different life might be like. He imagined the thrill his friend must have been feeling, the excitement of something new, the passion, the youthful energy emanating from that fresh start. A dangerous question took hold in his mind, one he had never dared ask himself before. What if it were me? One evening, as he was washing up in the bathroom, that question pressed on him harder than ever. Mahmud stood before the mirror and truly looked at himself. Under the bright bathroom light, the signs of age seemed harsher than usual. His hair was thinning at the crown, and a subtle bald spot had begun to take shape, no longer easy to ignore. The fine lines around his eyes looked deeper tonight, his jawline softer. His stomach had thickened over the years, forming a stubborn muffin top he only now noticed with fresh irritation. None of this was new, but tonight it all stood out more than ever. His foul mood made every imperfection feel magnified. He saw a man nearing 50, slipping quietly into middle age, and he resented it. His own reflection stared back at him, tired and restless, and for a moment, he barely recognized himself. He could almost hear the tick of an invisible clock counting down his remaining years. The realization crystallized in a single, shocking phrase that escaped his lips in a whisper. "I need new blood." The words hung in the bathroom air, echoing against the tiles. Mahmud's heart pounded as he heard himself say it. In that moment, a line had been crossed in his mind. The subtle discomfort was no longer subtle. A reckless and exhilarating desire was taking shape within him, a desire to upend his life in pursuit of something new. The cut. Mahmud's growing dissatisfaction soon erupted into open conflict at home. The change in him was stark and bewildering to his family. Where he had once been patient and affectionate, he became irritable and harsh. Nothing Amira did seemed to please him anymore. If dinner was a few minutes late, he would scowl and complain that the food was cold. If the living room was cluttered with the children's toys, he would mutter that the house was a mess. He began lashing out with criticisms daily. The laundry wasn't folded the right way. The floor wasn't mopped to his standard. Her cooking lacked flavor. Each complaint was laced with a bitterness that cut deep. Everyone in the household felt the tension. Amira was stunned and hurt by the sudden change in her husband's demeanor. For 22 years, Mahmud had been a loving partner, occasionally stubborn or moody, sure, but never cruel. Now, he seemed to find fault in everything she did. She tried her best to pacify him, assuming that perhaps he was under unusual stress at work. Whenever he lashed out, she held her tongue, reasoning that meeting anger with anger would only make things worse. In quiet moments, she reassured herself it was just a phase, that he would return to the kind man she knew once whatever pressures plagued him passed. But Mahmud's outbursts only escalated. To him, Amira's silence in the face of his tirades felt like confirmation that she was in the wrong. Her lack of protest almost annoyed him more. Why didn't she fight back? Did she secretly agree that she was failing as a wife? His frustration fed on itself, growing more intense each day. Their children watched these changes in their father with confusion and alarm. One evening, after he had berated Amira over a slightly overcooked meal, their youngest son timidly asked, "Baba, what happened? Why are you so angry?" Mahmud, jaw tight, snapped back, "It's between me and your mom. Stay out of it." The hurt look in his son's eyes barely registered with him in that moment. The whole family was on edge, as if a storm cloud had settled permanently over their home. Amira decided she could not ignore the situation any longer. Late one night, after the children were in bed, she waited up for Mahmud to come home. Lately, he had been returning later and later, often with vague excuses about work or meetings. In truth, he was spending more and more evenings out with his newly remarried friend, basking in the secondhand excitement of that youthful lifestyle. On those nights, Mahmud would return smelling of cigar, smoke, and envy, feeling both invigorated and resentful of the quiet house that awaited him. His friend's youthful new life was infectious in those late hours, giving Mahmud a secondhand thrill that made him feel young again, if only temporarily. But as exhilarating as it was to bask in his friend's glow, it was borrowed light. A thought began to take root with increasing urgency each time he went out. "I need one for myself." That particular night, he crept in past midnight, assuming everyone was asleep. But Amira was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lamp illuminating her tired face. As soon as he entered, she spoke gently. "Can we talk, Habibi?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with worry. Mahmud tensed, already defensive. "Talk about what?" he replied, avoiding her eyes as he hung up his coat. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, you haven't done anything," Amira said softly. "It's just, you've been acting different lately. I'm concerned. Did something happen? Is it work or something else?" For a split second, anger flared hot in his chest. "You happened," he nearly spat. The words almost escaped. He wanted to blame her for his unhappiness, to unload all the discontent roiling inside him. In his mind, he saw flashes of every little thing about her that had been irritating him. The way she tied her hair up carelessly, the comfortable but worn robe she wore, the dishes left in the sink. He pressed his lips together, swallowing those cruel words. Deep down, he knew she didn't deserve such blame. Instead, he ran a hand over his face and muttered, "I'm just tired." His voice was strained. Amira reached out and gently touched his arm. "We're worried about you," she whispered. "I'm worried about you." Mahmud pulled away, unable to meet her gaze. Shame and frustration warred within him. "I'm fine. I just need to sleep," he lied, eager to end the conversation. That night, they lay side by side in the dark, but sleep never came for Mahmud. His mind raced, with even greater urgency, after Amira's questions. Staring at the ceiling, he felt the weight of her concern, but instead of softening him, it only sharpened his resolve. In the silence, his thoughts fled to the life he imagined would fix everything. He pictured the version of himself he desperately wanted to be, waking up next to a beautiful young wife who adored him, feeling rejuvenated and important each day, envied by his peers. He imagined shedding his current life like an old skin and stepping into a new existence bursting with excitement and pleasure. Beside him, Amira eventually drifted into a restless sleep, a crease of worry still on her brow, even in dreams. Mahmud glanced at her and felt a pang, something like guilt, something like sorrow, but it was quickly drowned out by the vivid fantasy dancing in his mind's eye. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Mahmud had made a silent decision. The life he had would have to be destroyed to make way for the life he wanted. He didn't yet know exactly how he would do it, only that he would. His heart thumped with a dangerous mix of fear and anticipation. The pressure inside him had reached a breaking point. In a matter of hours, everything was about to change. The following morning, Mahmud rose, with grim determination coursing through his veins. At the office, he found himself unable to focus on his usual tasks. The plan he had formed in the dark of night now pounded in his head, demanding action. He closed the door to his office and sat behind his desk, staring blankly at his computer as scenarios raced through his mind. How am I going to do this? He wondered, his palms damp with sweat. He recalled how his friend had ended his own marriage, dropping the news on his unsuspecting wife like a bomb and walking away without looking back. The thought of doing the same made Mahmud's stomach twist. Despite his resentment, he knew Amira didn't deserve such cruelty. Part of him wanted to find a gentler way. But another voice, perhaps his pride, perhaps the lingering echo of his friend's bravado, insisted there was no escaping pain in a moment like this. Best to make it quick and final, like ripping off a bandage. By late morning, Mahmud could no longer sit still. He delegated the day's tasks to his staff and told his secretary he would be out for the rest of the day. "If anyone calls, I'm not here," he muttered as he grabbed his keys and left, heart hammering. The drive home felt surreal. The familiar streets blurred past as adrenaline coursed through him. He had played out this moment in his imagination so many times that it felt like he was on autopilot. When Mahmud arrived home, the house was quiet. Amira was in the kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes. A mundane scene he had witnessed countless times. For a second, he hesitated in the doorway, watching her back as she scrubbed a pan at the sink. A voice in his mind pleaded, "Stop. Think about what you're doing." But it was too late for second thoughts. The momentum of his decision propelled him forward. "Amira," he called out, his voice strained and unfamiliar to his own ears. She turned, surprised to see him home so early. Drying her hands on a towel, she gave him a tentative smile. "You're back already. Is everything she began. But the question died on her lips as she noticed his expression. Something in his eyes made her face fall. Mahmud's mouth went dry, His heart was beating wildly, but his resolve hardened. He opened his mouth and forced the words out clumsily, all at once, the only words he could manage. "I divorce you. I divorce you. I divorce you." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. The faint clink of a glass from the sink punctuated the stillness as Amira accidentally let it slip from her fingers. She stared at him, uncomprehending, as if he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. What did you say?" she whispered, her voice thin and shaky. Mahmud felt a lump in his throat. His hands were trembling. He forced himself to speak, more firmly this time, each word tasting like metal on his tongue. "It's over, Amira. I want a divorce." Amira's face went through a rapid cycle of emotions, confusion, dawning, horror, and then a fiery, unbridled rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, her voice cracking. After everything we've been through, you do this?" Her shock ignited into fury in an instant. You're a monster." The towel she had been holding dropped to the floor. In all their years together, Mahmud had never seen her like this. Amira had always been the picture of composure and patience, rarely even raising her voice. Now her eyes blazed with hurt and anger, tears of betrayal starting to spill. Before Mahmud could react, Amira lunged for the wooden knife block on the counter. In one swift motion, she yanked out a large butcher knife, the steel blade flashing under the kitchen lights. Mahmud's blood ran cold. "Amira, wait," he gasped, instinctively stepping back with his hands raised. But she was beyond hearing. With a ferocious cry, an animal sound of rage and heartbreak, she charged at him, knife raised. Mahmud's survival instincts kicked in. He turned and bolted for the front door. Behind him, Amira's footsteps pounded on the hardwood floor. He fumbled with the lock for a heart-stopping second, then wrenched the door open and flew outside. He sprinted across the yard in a blind panic. He heard Amira's voice behind him, a raw, keening wail of pain and fury, but he didn't dare glance back. Mahmud dove into his car, hands shaking so badly, he struggled to fit the key into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life. He slammed the car into gear and sped off. As he tore down the street, there was a sudden thud. He sideswiped a parked car in his frenzy. The screech of metal on metal rang out, but he didn't stop. Breathing hard, he risked a look in the rearview mirror. Amira had chased him as far as the middle of the street. She stood there in her robe and slippers, clutching the butcher knife in her fist. Her shoulders heaved with sobs, or perhaps it was still rage. From a distance, she looked small and broken, a woman devastated beyond words. Mahmud's stomach lurched at the sight. His eyes burned with tears that he fiercely blinked back. He quickly redirected his gaze to the road ahead, his vision blurring. He couldn't afford to feel pity or regret right now. His own life had been in danger moments ago, and adrenaline still thundered through his veins. As the distance between them grew, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. "I did it," he whispered to himself, voice trembling. It was unclear even to him whether those words carried triumph or utter despair. In truth, he felt both. A cold wave of realization washed over him. There was no going back now. He had detonated his marriage and broken his family in one morning. Mahmud gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, his heart thudding like a drum. He drove on, leaving behind the only home he had known for decades, and the woman whose world he had just shattered, along with his own. The mirage. In the months that followed the dramatic collapse of his marriage, Mahmud's life entered a strange, hollow limbo. He moved out of the family home and into a serviced apartment, an upscale short-term rental with crisp, white sheets and spotless surfaces that felt nothing like home. The silence there was deafening. After years in a house filled with chatter, laughter, and the aromas of home cooking, he now woke to a void. No children clattering in the kitchen, no Amira humming a morning tune, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the emptiness of his own company. The aftermath of the divorce was as bitter and messy as one might expect. Mahmud's younger brother tried to act as a mediator, shuttling messages between Mahmud and Amira to sort out finances and custody of the kids. But Amira, deeply hurt and furious, wanted no direct contact. She hired a tough lawyer and prepared to take Mahmud for all he was worth. Honestly, he couldn't blame her. Still, he told his brother to just relay what I say and nothing more, trying vainly to control the spiraling situation. It was futile. With each passing week, the legal battle grew uglier. Decades of partnership were being dissected into bank statements and custody schedules, all communicated through lawyers' letters. What little goodwill remained between them quickly gave way to resentment. Rather than face the emotional wreckage she had created, Mahmud sought refuge in distraction. He refused to even entertain the notion that he had made a mistake. Instead, he told himself he had simply taken the first bold step toward a better life. To prove it, mostly to himself, he set out to upgrade every aspect of his existence. He spent hours at the gym, pounding the treadmill as if sheer sweat could cleanse him of regret. He lifted weights, trying to add muscle to a body gone soft, convincing himself he was sculpting a new man. He traded in his conservative wardrobe for trendy designer clothes, better suited to a younger man. Mahmud was determined to reinvent himself, to show the world and himself that he was happier and more vibrant than ever. Nights were the hardest. Alone in that pristine apartment, he would numb himself with mindless television or scroll endlessly through his phone. But even streaming movies couldn't drown out the loneliness. So he turned to social media and dating apps. Late at night, his face lit by the glow of his phone, Mahmud created a profile on a Muslim matchmaking site. He chose photos that showcased what he thought would attract someone new. One of him standing proudly in front of his Mercedes, another in an expensive suit with a flashy watch. In his bio, he highlighted his successful business, the nice house he still thought of as his house for now, and the comfortable life he could provide. His heart still ached with residual pain, but he pushed it aside. A rejuvenating new love is what I need, he thought. I'll find someone who appreciates what I have to offer. It didn't take long for someone to bite. A message pinged from a user named Fatima. She was 20 years old, barely older than Mahmud's eldest daughter. In her profile picture, she wore stylish clothes and a playful smile. Her bio said she was looking for a serious relationship and described a love for travel and the finer things in life. To Mahmud, she was a vision of everything he thought he wanted: youth, beauty, a chance at a fresh start. In truth, what caught her eye was the life on display in his profile, the promise of wealth and security. But Mahmud, blinded by his own desire, didn't see that. Or perhaps he simply chose not to. They began talking, first through the app's chat, and then on long phone calls that stretched late into the night. From the first conversation, Fatima lavished attention on him that made him feel 10 feet tall. She listened with breathy interest as he talked about his work and life experiences. She giggled at his jokes, flirted sweetly, and told him he was exactly the kind of strong, successful man younger women fantasize about. Mahmud found himself grinning at his phone like a teenager with a crush. The void in his apartment and in his heart started to fill with each endearing message and selfie she sent. For the first time in months, he felt truly alive. Fatima's youthful energy was intoxicating. She made him feel desirable, important, young again. He became addicted to the feeling. Every ping of a new text from her gave him a rush. If she took too long to reply, he would pace his immaculate apartment, anxious as a schoolboy awaiting a call. It was as if the despair of his recent past was wiped away whenever he was immersed in her world. In just a few weeks, Mahmud became convinced he had found exactly what he needed. Fate, he thought, had given him a second chance at happiness, and he wasn't about to waste it. In an impetuous move, he asked Fatima to marry him. It happened during an idyllic weekend together. He had flown her to a beachside resort, pulling out all the stops: candlelit dinners, sunset walks, a diamond ring hidden in a fancy dessert. When he popped the question, Fatima's eyes widened with what looked like delight. She threw her arms around him and squealed yes before he had even finished speaking. Mahmud felt a surge of triumph and relief. In that moment, all the pain of the last year seemed to justify itself. He had traded the feeling of an unhappy life for a chance at something extraordinary. Who could fault him now? Elated and eager to please his young fiancée, Mahmud spared no expense in the months leading up to the wedding. He was a man on a mission to build a dazzling new world for himself and his bride-to-be. He drained a substantial portion of his company's funds to purchase a luxurious downtown penthouse, Fatima's dream home, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek designer finishes. He handed her the keys to a brand new Porsche as an engagement gift, delighting in her squeals of joy. Shopping sprees followed: high-end boutiques, designer jewelry, luxury handbags. If Fatima pointed at something, it was hers within days. Each time her eyes lit up at a new gift, Mahmud felt more certain that he was providing what his previous life lacked: excitement, glamour, passion. The spending was extravagant and unsustainable. He quietly liquidated some investments and took out loans against his business assets to keep the cash flowing. But he brushed aside any glimmer of worry. This, he told himself, was the price of securing his new life. If anything, he felt proud of how lavishly he was treating his bride. In his mind, he had her on the hook and was reeling her in, doing whatever it took to seal the deal before the wedding date. Blinded by infatuation and the thrill of new blood, Mahmud didn't realize the truth. He wasn't the one doing the catching. He was the one being caught. When the wedding day arrived, Mahmud stood at the altar in an opulent banquet hall, with Fatima radiant in a custom white gown beside him. He should have been the happiest man alive. Outwardly, he did beam with pride and excitement, yet there were shadows beneath the smiles. None of his children were in attendance. They had refused to come. His daughters and son hadn't spoken to him in months, their hurt and loyalty to their mother keeping them away. His parents, scandalized by how he had ended his first marriage, also declined to attend. His mother couldn't bear to watch, and his father had told him bluntly that he was making a fool of himself. As for Amira, even the mention of Mahmud's name was still a source of pain and anger for her. The thought of him remarrying so quickly was salt in the wound. Mahmud blocked all of that out. As he exchanged vows with a glowing Fatima under a canopy of flowers, he convinced himself none of the absences mattered. He had a stunning young wife on his arm, and a future that looked bright once more. Didn't he finally have everything he had longed for? That night, in the plush honeymoon suite he had reserved at a 5-star hotel, Mahmud felt a heady mix of relief and triumph. Against all odds, he told himself, he had managed to restart his life and find happiness on his own terms. The dark, lonely months after his first marriage ended were behind him now. Here was a beautiful woman in his arms, a new home waiting for them, and the promise of the vibrant life he had dreamed about. He fell asleep with a contented smile on his face, utterly convinced that his story had turned for the better. He couldn't have been more wrong. The unmasking. The reality of Mahmud's second marriage hit with brutal swiftness. In the initial weeks, still flush with honeymoon afterglow, he overlooked a few warning signs. He discovered on their wedding night that Fatima was not the chaste, sheltered girl she had modestly claimed to be, but he brushed that aside. It didn't bother him as much as he thought it might. What did bother him was how quickly the attentive, affectionate fiancée he had courted transformed into someone distant and indifferent once the ink on the marriage certificate was dry. Within the first month, it became glaringly obvious that Fatima had no intention of playing the role Mahmud had envisioned for her: a youthful, adoring housewife who would keep a tidy home, cook warm meals, and greet him each evening with a smile. Not long after they moved into the penthouse, Mahmud came home one night, after a tiring day of scrambling to keep his business afloat. The condo was dark, except for the flicker of a television in the living room. The delicious aromas of home-cooked dinner he had grown used to in his years with Amira were notably absent. He found Fatima sprawled on the sofa in leggings and a silk robe, eyes glued to her phone. A pile of boutique shopping bags sat carelessly on a chair, evidence of her day's activities. Mustering a pleasant tone, Mahmud asked, "Are we having dinner at home tonight, or should I order something?" It was his polite way of asking if she had cooked. Fatima didn't even look up from her screen. "I'm not cooking," she replied flatly, as if the very suggestion were absurd. He paused, taken aback by her bluntness. "All right, maybe we can cook something together?" he offered, trying to keep the mood light. Now she did look at him, arching an eyebrow in disbelief. "Why would I cook?" she said, her voice cutting. "You have money. Just order delivery or hire a chef or something." The air left Mahmud's lungs. Time seemed to slow as her words reverberated in his ears. "You have money." The casual dismissal in her tone, the entitlement, it was a slap across the face. In that moment, the glamorous mirage he had been living in began to crack. He stood there in the dim living room, the television casting restless shadows on the wall. Fatima had already turned her attention back to her phone, seemingly untroubled. Mahmud felt a wave of cold realization. It was like an avalanche of memories and insights colliding at once. He saw Amira in his mind's eye. Amira, who after a full day of managing the household, would still make sure dinner was ready for the family. He recalled the gentle way she would sometimes massage his shoulders when he came home complaining of stress. He remembered her bringing him hot tea during late nights, how she never let a birthday or anniversary go by without thoughtful effort. All those tender, everyday gestures that he had once dismissed as normal now shone in sharp relief. His chest tightened, and his eyes grew hot with unexpected tears. He turned away, not wanting Fatima to glimpse his expression. "What have I done?" he thought, stomach twisting. "I traded a lifetime of genuine care for this?" That night, Mahmud barely slept. He lay awake next to a wife who felt like a stranger, his mind racing. If there had been a veil over his eyes, it was now torn away. Fatima had never been interested in building a life with him. She was interested in the lifestyle he could provide. That night, Mahmud barely slept. He lay awake next to a wife who felt like a stranger, his mind racing. If there had been a veil over his eyes, it was now torn away. Fatima had never been interested in building a life with him. She was interested in the lifestyle he could provide. Now that she had the ring on her finger, she saw no need to pretend otherwise. The realization was a knife in his gut. He felt like the biggest fool in the world. He said nothing about the incident the next day, nor the day after. But he watched. With each passing week, more truths revealed themselves. Fatima refused to do any housework whatsoever. Cooking, cleaning, even simple tasks, insisting that was below her. She spent her days at high-end salons or out with friends, swiping his credit card like it had no limit. When home, she was either glued to social media or napping. The household was kept running by the staff Mahmud hired, a cook and a cleaner, paid replacements for everything Amira used to do out of love and duty. What stung most was the withdrawal of the affection Fatima had once shown. The playful flirting, the warm hugs, and sweet texts, all of that had vanished. At night, Fatima often retreated to a separate bedroom, complaining she was too tired if he sought any intimacy. He would hear her giggling on late-night calls with her girlfriends instead. More than once, he overheard her talking about him with obvious disdain, calling him old-fashioned or even flat-out old. Each time, he felt a flush of humiliation he never could have imagined during their whirlwind courtship. In public, Mahmud kept up appearances. With his buddies at the cafe, he still wore the mask of the proud husband, boasting about his hot young wife and how lucky he was. But inside the walls of that penthouse, he was miserable. The vibrant dream he had chased had soured into a daily humiliation. And yet, stubbornly, he told himself he couldn't abandon this path. How could he face the world, face his family, face himself, if he admitted that the grand gamble of leaving Amira for a new life had been a catastrophic mistake? Meanwhile, the financial strain he had been ignoring reached a breaking point. The lavish lifestyle he was funding bled his business dry. He had poured money into luxury cars, designer goods, a home far beyond his means, all while neglecting his company. Without his constant attention and reinvestment, his manufacturing business struggled. Contracts went unrenewed. Creditors began calling in loans. Mahmud started quietly selling off equipment and assets to cover mounting debts and to continue financing the household expenses. It was like trying to hold sand in his fist. The more he spent to keep Fatima happy, the faster everything slipped away. After a year of this charade, the house of cards collapsed. Mahmud could no longer hide the dire state of their finances. One evening, he sat Fatima down in the marble-floored living room. She was irritated, halfway through applying her makeup to go out with friends. He took a deep breath and told her the truth. The money was almost gone. They could not sustain the way they were living. He would likely have to sell the penthouse, sell the remaining car, and pull back entirely until he could rebuild financially. Fatima stared at him as if he were speaking nonsense. "Just earn more then," she said flippantly, waving a manicured hand. It was clear she didn't grasp, or didn't care, how serious things were. "I can't magically earn more overnight," Mahmud said, struggling to keep his voice calm. "The business is failing. I might need to start over. We have to cut expenses. Maybe move somewhere smaller for a while." "I'm not moving anywhere," she snapped, folding her arms. "I like this place. I'm not going to live in some cheap flat like a nobody." Mahmud felt something inside him crack. He thought of all the money he had poured into fulfilling her every desire. And here she was, essentially telling him that if he couldn't maintain the fantasy, she had no use for him. Any hope that she might show loyalty, or at least understanding in hard times, evaporated. Anger, hot and long suppressed, flared in him. "Do you even care what happens to us?" he demanded. "This is our life falling apart, Fatima." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "I never asked you to spend beyond your means. If you're broke, that's your problem," she retorted. "Don't drag me into it. I'm not changing my lifestyle. If you can't handle it, maybe you should leave." That was it. Those words, dripping with careless arrogance, hit like blows. Mahmud realized fully then that in Fatima's eyes, he was just a walking wallet, and now an empty one at that. The past year flashed through his mind. Every compromise he had made, every humiliation he had swallowed. The memory of Amira's heartbroken face and his children's hurt. The weight of his mistakes and the coldness of Fatima's response crashed together, igniting a cold, simmering anger deep inside him. "Fine," he said softly, barely meeting her eyes. "If that's how you feel, I divorce you." He paused, then repeated it, quieter each time, just wanting it to be over. "I divorce you. I divorce you." Fatima's eyes widened in disbelief. For all her threats, she never expected him to be the one to cut ties. She recovered quickly, though. With a scornful sneer, she picked up one of her designer, high-heeled shoes from beside the couch and hurled it at him. The stiletto sailed past his head and smacked against the wall. "You're a fat, balding joke," she snarled. "I should have left you the day after the wedding. You actually thought I'd love someone like you? Pathetic. Get out of my house." Her house. The house he had bought and paid for. Mahmud felt a numbness creeping over him. There was nothing left to say. In a strange way, he felt relieved by her outburst. It crystallized the truth he had been avoiding. Without another word, he stood and walked out the front door, closing it behind him, as she continued to curse him from inside. Mahmud stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, he caught his reflection in the mirrored wall, disheveled, hollow-eyed, older than he remembered. The slow descent gave him no comfort. Each floor ticking past felt like a silent reminder of how far he had fallen. By the time the doors opened, he wasn't angry or heartbroken. He was simply spent. In the span of 3 years, he had destroyed one life and ruined another. Now, he truly had nothing. No wife, no family, no fortune. Yet amid the emotional rubble, a kind of grim clarity settled in. He could finally admit to himself that every stage of this tragedy was a result of his own choices. Choices made from a warped mindset, from a place of ingratitude and fear. Mahmud walked to his car, the one sensible luxury he hadn't yet sold, and sat behind the wheel. He didn't start the engine. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel and allowed himself to cry, deep, heaving sobs that echoed in the empty vehicle. He cried for Amira and the children he had alienated. He cried for the business he had run into the ground. He cried for the self-respect he had traded away, chasing pride and illusions. When his tears finally ran dry, Mahmud was left with silence. In that newfound clarity, the fantasy was over. Looking back now, he could see the entire arc of his downfall with painful sharpness. The problem had never been Amira, or his friend's happiness, or the youth he feared losing. The problem had been him, his frame of mind, his lack of appreciation for what he had, his cowardice in facing his own aging and seeking growth in healthier ways. As he finally started the car and drove off into the night, Mahmud knew he was heading into an uncertain future. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't deluding himself. He had awoken to the bitter truth of his mistakes. And though he felt utterly alone, that truth, at least, was something real. Something he could maybe, eventually, start to build upon. The forever lie. Mahmud's voice trailed off, and he slumped back in his chair. His tale had come to an end on that bitter note. I realized I had been holding my breath. My heart was pounding, as if I had lived through those events myself. Around us, the cafe had filled up a bit, and the Formula One race on the televisions was reaching its climax, but I hadn't paid any attention to any of it. I was entirely absorbed in the drama of Mahmud's life. Across the table, he ran a hand over his face, as if exhausted from reliving it all. He let out a hollow, joyless chuckle. "I told you it was a messed-up story," he said quietly, attempting a wry smile that quickly faltered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I can see what you mean. That's a lot." It felt woefully inadequate to say, but I was honestly at a loss for words. What comfort or wisdom could I possibly offer after a story like that, especially here and now? For a moment, we sat in the heavy silence that followed his confession. Brian, who had been sitting at the bar watching the race, glanced over at us with concern, sensing the shift in atmosphere. I cleared my throat gently. "How long has it been since the second divorce?" I asked. Mahmud stared down at the table, idly peeling the label off his beer bottle. 2 years, he muttered. 2 years. Time enough, perhaps, to begin rebuilding, if he had been inclined to try. I ventured another careful question. "And what's life like for you now, day to day?" He shrugged, without looking up. "I rent a crappy 2-bedroom apartment nearby," he said. "Share it with some random guy I found online. Don't even know him. A couple of times a week he brings girls home and, well, the walls are paper thin." Mahmud's lip curled in distaste. "I took a job cleaning office buildings at night. Janitor work. The mighty have fallen, eh?" He let out a bitter laugh. "I used to hire people to clean my offices. Now I'm the one mopping floors." I listened quietly, absorbing the humiliation in his tone. He took a swig from his drink and continued. "My days, I sleep as much as I can. When I'm not working, sometimes I come here. Meet up with a few other guys my age." He gestured vaguely toward a corner where a couple of gray-haired men were playing cards. "Most of them are divorced or miserable too. We sit around, drink coffee, complain about life. That's about it. That's my big routine." "Do you see your kids?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened. "They want nothing to do with me," he replied. "I get updates through my brother. My eldest is doing an internship at some law firm, apparently. The younger two, I haven't spoken to them in ages. Can't blame them. In their eyes, I'm the bastard who broke their mom's heart. They're better off without me messing up their lives." A heavy pause settled between us. I decided to ask the question that any coach or friend would be compelled to ask at this point, even if it was risky. "So, what's the plan now, Mahmud? What do you want to do moving forward?" The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Mahmud's head snapped up, and for a moment, I thought I saw a spark of that old fire that had driven him to shatter his world, now turned to rage at its ruins. He slammed his palm on the table, causing the cutlery to rattle. "Plan?" he snarled. "There is no plan, Daniel." A few nearby patrons glanced over. I raised my hand slightly, trying to calm him. "I didn't mean to." "You think I have some bright future to map out?" he shouted, voice thick with sarcasm and pain. "Listen to me. It's over. My life is over. Understand?" His eyes were wild, and tears of frustration brimmed within them. "I have no money. My business is gone. My kids hate me. My ex-wife wishes I was dead. Fatima used me and threw me away. How the hell am I supposed to move forward from that, huh?" His volume rose with each question, raw emotion pouring out unchecked. "What are you, stupid? You're the life coach. Tell me, how do I fix that?" He jabbed a finger into his own chest. "It's done. My life is shit, and it's not going to magically get better." By now, every eye in the cafe was on us. The staff behind the counter paused, unsure whether to intervene. I felt my heart in my throat. This had gone further off the rails than I ever anticipated. "Mahmud, I began, meaning to steady the moment, to offer some kind of clarity, but I didn't get the chance." In one swift motion, Mahmud stood up from his chair. For a split second, I braced, fearing he might actually take a swing at me. His fists were clenched, knuckles white. I remained seated but alert, palms open in a calming gesture. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean..." Suddenly, Brian was at our table, stepping between Mahmud and me. He pressed a firm hand against Mahmud's chest, urging him back gently. "Hey, take it easy, man," Brian said, voice calm but urgent. "It's all right. We're all friends here." Mahmud was breathing hard, his face flushed with a mix of anger and anguish. For a tense moment, he stood rigidly, glaring past Brian at me. Then the fight in him seemed to fizzle out. His shoulders slumped, and he sank back down into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The cafe slowly returned to its prior buzz as people looked away, giving us back a semblance of privacy. Brian kept a hand on Mahmud's shoulder, speaking to him quietly. I caught phrases like, "It's okay," and I know," in soothing tones. I realized my presence was likely doing more harm than good at this point. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a business card, the one with my personal number, and set it on the table beside Mahmud's drink. He didn't even glance at it, but I knew Brian would make sure he kept it. I met Brian's eyes. "I should go," I said softly. Brian nodded in agreement. "I'll call you later," he murmured. I stood, taking one last look at Mahmud. He seemed smaller somehow, hunched over, his body shaking slightly, with silent sobs, or maybe just tremors of anger held inside. The man who had, mere hours ago, been boasting about the new life he sought was now utterly broken in front of me. It was a heartbreaking sight. With a heavy heart, I turned and walked out of the cafe. The bell over the door jingled mundanely, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had just played out. Outside, the late afternoon sun was blinding. I blinked, realizing I had been in that dim corner of the cafe for well over an hour. It felt like another world in there. I made my way to my car, each step heavy with what I had just heard and seen. Mahmud's story echoed in my mind, the intensity of his midlife spiral, how he ran toward what he thought he wanted, only to lose everything. The bitter irony was inescapable. The escape he longed for had only deepened his pain. I sat behind the wheel for a long while, hands motionless on the steering wheel, engine off. Through the cafe's front window, I could see Brian still sitting with Mahmud, talking to him calmly. Mahmud had lifted his head, and I saw the glint of tears on his cheeks as he wiped them away. I hoped Brian could get through to him, even if just to ensure he made it home safe. My thoughts turned over quietly, observing the pain radiating from Mahmud, recognizing patterns I had seen in others before: denial, regret, disorientation. The coach in me noted where he was in his process, how far he still had to go. He wasn't ready for guidance yet. He was still in the middle of it, adrift in his own darkness. No one could lead him out until he was willing to move toward the light himself. I took a deep breath and finally started the car. As I pulled away, I whispered a small prayer under my breath, for Mahmud's healing, for his family's healing, and perhaps selfishly, a thank you for the perspective his story had given me. Not all cautionary tales come packaged in a book or a film. Sometimes they sit across from you in a cafe on a Sunday afternoon, living and breathing. This wasn't the ending of Mahmud's story. Life would go on, and perhaps change would come later. But for now, the conclusion was simply this: he was a man in a self-made prison, not ready to see the key in his hand. And all I could do was leave the door open, should he ever choose to walk through it. The box. Unfortunately, at least for now, Mahmud's story didn't have a neat or happy ending. I drove away from the cafe with a heaviness in my chest, wishing I could say he found quick redemption or miraculously reunited with his family. But life is rarely that tidy. Sometimes, people remain stuck in their pain until they themselves decide to climb out. One image kept coming to me as I thought about Mahmud: a box. I pictured him trapped inside a small, invisible box built by his own mindset. Throughout his journey, he had merely traded one mental box for another, never truly stepping outside any of them. Each box was formed by a set of beliefs that limited how he saw himself and his life. In the beginning, he lived in a box of complacency. He saw his marriage as comfortable but unchangeable. If something felt lacking, he assumed that was just how life was, or that it was Amira's fault. He never considered looking inward or trying to improve things between them. From inside that box, he believed that if he was unhappy, the solution had to come from outside, not from any change within himself or his relationship. When his friend's drastic life change happened, it didn't free Mahmud at all. It shoved him straight into a new box built of envy. Through that lens, his ordinary life suddenly seemed intolerably dull next to his friend's exciting second marriage. He began to see Amira only for what she wasn't, unfairly comparing her to an impossible ideal. A saintly memory of his mother, combined with the fantasy of a young, adventurous partner. In this nothing is good enough box, he failed to appreciate his wife's love or any of the good in his life. He fixated only on what he felt he lacked and convinced himself that blowing up his marriage was the only way to seize happiness. Divorcing Amira and chasing the mirage of a new life didn't break him out either. It just put him in another box made of ego and denial. He spun a story that he deserved this glamorous second chance, that a vibrant young wife and a life of luxury would fill the emptiness inside him. For a brief time, that new box glittered. He had the flashy penthouse, the sports car, the beautiful 20-year-old bride on his arm. But it was still a trap, built on superficial pleasures and external validation. Reality soon punctured those walls. When Fatima turned out to offer none of the warmth or loyalty he craved, the illusion collapsed. In that brutal moment of clarity, Mahmud finally saw the value of everything he had thrown away. Tragically, that insight came too late to undo the damage. Now, after everything, he's stuck in perhaps the cruelest box of all: despair. Its walls echo with defeatist beliefs like, life is unfair, I've been dealt a bad hand, and it's all over for me. In this self-imposed prison, he truly believes there's no escape, no redemption, no next chapter for him. Clinging to hopelessness feels safer than daring to hope and risk being hurt again. As I watched him lash out in the cafe, I understood that as long as he stays in that mindset, no one else can pull him out. He still hasn't fully owned his role in his own downfall. It's easier for him to curse life and see himself as a victim of circumstance. As long as he holds on to that narrative, he'll remain stuck in that mental box. The truth is, you can't escape a box if you don't realize you're in one. Right now, Mahmud doesn't yet see that his hopelessness is just another box, and probably the tightest one yet. He's busy measuring every tomorrow with the yardstick of yesterday's failures, ensuring that the future will look just as bleak as the past. His fury, when I gently asked about his plans, showed how fiercely he's protecting that safe box of defeat. After all, considering a better future would require hope, and hope makes you vulnerable. He won't break out of this prison until he's willing to poke some holes in those walls, until he can replace "it's over for me" with even a tiny thought like, maybe it's not. Once he allows himself to believe that change is possible, that box will begin to crack open. Sitting in my car, I found myself quietly rooting for him. I hoped that one day soon, Mahmud would grow tired of that darkness and reach out for help, pick up my card, call his brother, something, and say, I want to change. I've seen people come back from far worse. As long as you're alive, there's always a chance to turn things around. But I also know that no amount of advice or support can help until he decides to take a step forward on his own. His story isn't truly over yet. He's still here, which means he still holds the pen. Even if right now he's scribbling the same sorrowful line over and over. When, if, he's ready to write a new chapter, he'll find help waiting. That's why I left him my business card. A tangible reminder that whenever he chooses to find a way out of that box, someone will be there to guide him. As I pulled away from the cafe, I whispered, please find your way out, Mahmud. It was both a hopeful prayer for him and a reminder to myself. No matter how far someone may fall, as long as they're alive, there's hope for a new beginning. But the first step is believing it's possible. The loop. What we witnessed in Mahmud's journey is a vivid example of how our own beliefs and fears can trap us. His story shows how a person can become confined by their own frame of reference, how unexamined desires and unchecked fears can lead into a downward spiral, each step convincing them that they have no other choice when, in fact, they're making choices all along. There's a concept in psychology and coaching that describes this perfectly: the translogic loop. It's a cycle where an initial trigger sets off a self-reinforcing chain of perceptions, beliefs, and behaviors that can distort one's reality. It works like this. First, an activating event occurs, something that provokes a strong emotional reaction. For Mahmud, the first trigger was seeing his friend's sudden second marriage. The second major trigger came after his own second divorce, when he was alone and convinced he had lost everything. Each of these events sparked powerful emotions in him: envy and excitement in the first case, fear and despair in the second. Next, his imagination went to work. After the first trigger, he started vividly fantasizing about an alternate life, one with a younger wife and a renewed sense of youth. He replayed that mental movie on loop, picturing how much better everything could be. Years later, after his second collapse, his imagination flipped to the opposite extreme. Now, he constantly envisioned a bleak future of loneliness and failure. Our minds are adept at telling stories. Given a spark, they can create entire worlds of hope or hopelessness out of nothing. Those imagined scenarios solidified into beliefs. Because Mahmud had replayed the fantasy of a better life so often, he began to accept it as truth. He decided he needed a younger wife and a drastic change to be happy. that his marriage to Amira was unbearably stagnant. After the collapse of his second marriage, an equally vivid internal story convinced him that his life was ruined beyond repair. Neither belief was objectively true, but each felt true because he had imagined it so completely. Once a belief took root, it drove his emotions and behavior. Convinced that a new marriage was the answer to his unhappiness, Mahmud grew cold and cruel toward Amira and their kids, and ultimately blew up his family in pursuit of that belief. Later, convinced that his life was essentially over, he sank into bitterness and lashed out at anyone who suggested otherwise, as I experienced in the cafe. He behaved as if each belief were fact, and by doing so, he made those beliefs more real. Finally, his actions created an altered reality that matched the beliefs. Mahmud's certainty that I can do better than Amira led him to end a marriage that, while not perfect, had been full of love and stability. That choice set him on a path that produced exactly what he feared most: a life defined by instability, loneliness, and regret. Later, his belief that it's all over for me has kept him living a diminished existence, alone in a tiny apartment, estranged from his loved ones. In both cases, a false belief drove him to act in ways that eventually made the belief come true. Around and around this cycle a person can go, often without seeing it. The trance logic loop itself is neutral. It can trap us in nightmares or propel us toward better outcomes, depending on what beliefs we feed into it. In Mahmud's case, the loop was fueled by negative, false evidence, and so it spiraled him downward into devastation. The hopeful flip side is that the same cycle can work in a positive direction. Just as a negative trance loop can send someone downward, a positive loop can lift someone up. It often begins with a new activating event, and sometimes hitting rock bottom itself serves as that wake-up call. Then comes a shift in imagination, a willingness to picture a life where change is possible. That shift can spark new beliefs. Perhaps, I can grow from this, or I deserve another chance. Those healthier beliefs will start to influence one's emotions and behaviors, maybe prompting someone to seek help, to apologize and make amends, or to take small positive steps each day. And those actions, over time, create a new reality that confirms the new beliefs. Life does get better. You can heal relationships and find purpose again. In short, breaking out of a negative loop means changing the input. It requires challenging the false evidence you've been living by and replacing it with hopeful truths. It's not easy, nothing worthwhile ever is, but it is possible. I often tell my clients that real change happens when the desire to change finally outweighs the comfort of staying the same. As long as Mahmud believes it's safer to wallow in despair than to risk trying again, he'll remain where he is. Only when he decides he absolutely cannot live another day in that miserable status quo will he find the motivation to claw his way out. No matter how solid and suffocating that box of his feels right now, it's important to remember that it's made of thoughts, not steel. And thoughts can change. Mahmud isn't truly doomed unless he decides he is. His best days could still be ahead of him, different from what he once imagined, perhaps, but potentially full of meaning in ways he can't see yet. He might, one day, reconcile with his children. He might rebuild his career, or use his hard-won wisdom to help others avoid the mistakes he made. He might even find companionship again with someone who appreciates the man he's become through this painful journey. All those possibilities exist outside the narrow walls of the box he's in now. As a coach and as a fellow human being, I sincerely hope Mahmud reaches that turning point. I hope he finds that spark of courage to challenge the narrative that says it's over. When the pain of staying the same finally outweighs his fear of change, he'll discover that the key to his shackles was in his hand the whole time. And my hope isn't just for him. If you've listened to Mahmud's story and any part of it struck a chord with you, take it as a gentle nudge. Step back and consider how you're framing your own life. Are you sure you're truly stuck? Or could it be that you're just viewing things through the confines of a box you've built yourself? The story of the box asks each of us, will you be confined by your perceptions, or will you break free and expand them? Wherever you are right now, if you feel stuck or hopeless, remember that as long as you're alive, your story isn't finished. Every single day is a chance to break a pattern, to form a new belief, and to take a step in a different direction. Life is full of unknowns and risks, but it's also full of growth, resilience, and second chances. It's never too late to turn the page and write a new chapter. So, if you find yourself stuck in a box of your own, try cracking open the lid. Even if it's just a tiny gap at first, let a little light in. Question the truths you've been telling yourself. Inch by inch, widen that opening until you can step out completely. You may discover that the world outside is far less hostile and far more promising than it seemed from inside your walls. Whatever you decide, and wherever your journey leads, I wish you the courage to change, the clarity to see things as they are, and the compassion to forgive yourself and move forward. Godspeed on your journey.